last summer I had the opportunity to go hiking. I guess his grandfather mountain. I don't remember what mountain, but we were heading for Callaway Peak. Okay, that's where we're heading, and it's one of those ones where it's like you pack your stuff in, you get to the camp spot, and you find whatever wood you can because you're not carrying logs of wood up there. It's not like camping like I used to do, where you just pull your car up. You got to hike in, set up camp, and then you go hike some more. And it was kind of hard, and so we started heading up this this trail, and it's super cool as you're as you're going out on the trail. Every once in a while there are these rock formations that shoot out, and you can kind of go out there, you can see the valley, you can look back where you came from, you can look up where you're heading, you go, let's see those two little points up there, one of those is Callaway's Peak. That's where we're heading. And you go, wow, it looks far away. Okay. And you just keep marching up the hill, and you keep going, and you keep going. And by the way, my friends who I was with, one was Brian, who goes to church here. He and his workmates are probably online right now laughing at me because we got a life group that meets in the airport while they work on Sunday mornings, so it's pretty cool. Anyways, welcome, guys. And Ed, God bless you. Anyways, their nicknames were Roadrunner and Coyote. And as you can guess, Roadrunner was pretty good at hiking. And everyone who goes with him gets a nickname, and my nickname was Bookworm. I don't know what that has to do with hiking, but whatever. Maybe it sounds cooler in your ears. I don't know. Anyways, so we start going up there, and I start getting kind of tired. I start getting, wow, this is kind of wearing on me. Okay. And we start, finding these moments to stop and take a break. And then in the marches, the hiking gets shorter and shorter. You know what I mean? Like every 5 minutes, I'm going, oh gosh, okay. And so every time there was a rock formation, I was like, you know what? I think we should just take in the view. You know what I mean? We should look at this stuff. And we get out there and we look, and it's just beautiful. And there's this rock formation just to the left and a little below Callaway Peak, and goes, that's Flat Rock View right there. That's it. And I keep going, it doesn't seem to be getting closer as we hike. It just seems just the same far away. And we keep going. And eventually we make it to Flat Rock View. Like we're almost there. And Brian goes, hey, this is the last cell service you're going to have, so you might as well. So I FaceTime my family, show them where we are, show them the view. It's amazing. And then all of the sky just dumps on us. Came out of nowhere. Just rain and rain and rain. And we're sitting under rocks eating beef jerky, trying to wait out this storm. And it doesn't stop. It just keeps going. And we're right around the corner. We're just a few more turns, just one more push. We're going to be at Callaway's Peak. And we just go, guys, it's going to get worse and worse. We just got to get back to camp. And so we have to turn back at Flat Rock Junction and go back to camp. And which is fine because I was tired. And it was good to go back, and I had, and I get there, and on the next morning, we head back to our truck, and the last thing I do is I pick up some trail maps so I can show my kids where their dad went, you know what I mean? So I get home, I have the kids circled around me, and I'm highlighting the path. I go, this is where we were, and this is probably where I talked to you, and blah, blah, blah. And I get done highlighting the trail that we had hiked. And I look at it, and I go, we weren't halfway to Callaway Peak. We were nowhere close. We were not even I would have died on that mountain, guys. I would have, if I did not turn back, I would have died on the mountain. And here's what I didn't realize. I was so fortunate to learn this just by having rain turn me back. What I didn't realize was I was heading for a false peak. Do you know what a false peak is? A false peak is one of the great demoralizing things in mountain climbing and hiking, is where you see this peak, and that's what you're aiming for. It's right there, and once we get there, it's the end. And then you get to the top of that peak, and you look up, and you see there's a lot more mountain to climb. And what it does to mountain climbers and hikers is just this great demoralizing event, because you thought, I was almost done. It's very different than temporary, finish lines when you're running. When you're running, you're I don't have to run the whole way now. I just got to make it to that light pole, and that keeps you moving, right? But a false peak comes with promise. A false peak comes with this idea that you're almost done, and you get to stop, and it's going to be great. And then you get there, and you realize, I just got more work to do. There's just more going. And in Nehemiah, we've been reading through the book together, and Nehemiah is dealing with his own false peak. Not a false peak of him mountain climbing. Not a false peak where he thought the wall was almost built, but it didn't actually get built. No, it's a spiritual false peak. A moment where he looks up one day and he realizes, oh, this is much worse than I thought. And the Old Testament, it's a fascinating collection of writings. The Old Testament is very familiar with this false peak. It's not comfortable with it. No, it's not happy about it. It's not like it's glad to know, but it is very familiar with this false peak where you're going, okay, we thought we were going to make it this far with God, and then they get halfway there and they just turn back and they go rampant, they go rogue and everything goes wrong. And it happens over and over and over again. It's what Joshua had to deal with. It's what the judges dealt with probably 30 times in the book of Judges, where they make this resolution with God and then they turn away from it. They make this resolution with God and they turn away from it. And Nehemiah and Malachi and Ezra all had to deal with this false peak where they thought the people were finally getting it. And then they just turn away. And if your life with God has been anything like my life with God, you can go back in your story and you can pinpoint at least one or two or several false peaks where you thought, you know what? It's going to be different from here on out. And then time passed, and we just turn away. Here's what false peaks all have in common. Here's what makes them so brutal. There's a build-up, and then there's the letdown. And that letdown makes things really difficult to keep going. So there's the build-up and there's the letdown. Now here's the deal. Last week, we started looking at what was actually God's goal for the people of Israel. Remember last week we were talking about it. Nehemiah, we think the book of Nehemiah is a book about what? Building a wall, right? That's what, you ever think Nehemiah, you think brick wall. There's going to be a brick graphic, and there's bricks, and there's going to be people with swords and shovels, and they're going to build a wall. And then that gets done in 7 chapters, and then it's a book of 13, all right? I almost did the math in front of you, but I didn't want to do it and look dumb. So it's a 13-chapter book. The wall gets built in 7. So what's going on in the rest of the book? And last week we saw that God had a deeper purpose for the people of Israel than just getting their city back on its feet. Than just rebuilding the wall. God actually wanted to do more. He wanted to rebuild his people. He wanted to build a people more than he wanted to build the wall. Building the wall just made room for that spiritual renewal. Remember, we learned this last week. And we get to this point where everything seems like it's just going to be a fairy tale. Where they go, oh yeah, it's great. And Ezra leads them through the law and he starts teaching the law, and their hearts start breaking because of the sins they've committed. They start going, whoa, everything's going to be different. And he goes, no, don't mourn about this because God has saved you and the joy of the Lord is your strength and it's going to be great. We're going to celebrate, not cry. It's going to be a wonderful thing. And then what happens in chapter 9, verse 38, says this, because of all this, this is the people of Israel talking right now, because of all this, we make a firm covenant in writing. And what they're saying is we're going to actually make this official. We're going to do business with God. We're not just going to have this momentary feeling where we go, man, it kind of felt nice to have that message from God. No, we're going to buy in. We're going to go all in with God. And in chapter 10, they're going to basically give 4 areas of their life where they're going to say, we're not going to make these mistakes anymore. We're not going to turn from God in these areas anymore. And they go with this: marriage, Sabbath, financial support of the temple, and the physical upkeep of the temple. They say, we're not going to neglect the house of God. This is the change that we're going to make. And what's fascinating about these 4 areas is that none of them are fun. They're not the fun things about like what's really fun about our relationship with God is when His love like kind of comes down on us and we kind of understand Him in a new way, or this new idea shows up and God kind of takes our mental capacity and just kind of says, hey, I'm going to blow that up for you real quick, and you're going to have this new idea that's going to be a part of your life. You go, wow, the gospel, the message of the Bible is like wrecking me right now. That's fun. And when we worship and we sing in the tops of our lungs and it's fun. But then there's some things about our Christian life that they're just not fun. They're not sad. They're not anything. They're just part of the Christian life. And there are things we sometimes go, does that really have to be a thing? Like Sabbath. Like really, we're going to have to worry about the Sabbath. But what's interesting about the laws that God gives people is that as you enter into them, you realize there is a wisdom hiding in plain sight that you didn't see before. That as we follow God's way of living, we end up with a life that is, quite frankly, enviable. And people go, how'd you get that? How'd you do that? Wait, what do you do? And you go, I'm just living like what God told me to do. Like, for example, and so what's interesting about the way God interacts with His people in the Old Testament is He lays out the law, and then the people have an opportunity to respond and say, we agree to this. We will adhere to this law. This law is not going to adhere to us. We'll adhere to it. And the first place I can think of this happening is Exodus chapter 24. Now, if you know the Bible, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and Moses broke them out of Egypt, and they went into the wilderness, about on their way to the promised land, and God starts giving them laws. It starts with the Ten Commandments, and He goes up on Mount Sinai, and He's talking with God, and He keeps coming down to the people. He says, here's the law. Here's more that God wants you to know. Here are more things that you should be doing, or things you should not be doing, and all that sort of stuff. And in chapter 24, verse 3, Moses came to the people and told them all the words of the Lord, and all the rules. And all the people answered in one voice, and they said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And in chapter 10, Nehemiah is in front of a group of people, and they do the same exact thing. And listen to some of these. These are some verses out of chapter 10, verse 30 and 39, somewhere in there. And here, listen to some of the we statements they make. We will not give our daughters to the peoples of the land, and take their daughters for our sons. And the peoples of the land, and if the peoples of the land bring goods or any grain on the Sabbath to sell, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath, or because it is a holy day. And we will forego the crops in the seventh year in the exaction of every debt. Verse 32, we will also take on ourselves the obligation to give the yearly third part of a shekel for the house of the service of our God. And verse 39 says, we will not neglect the house of the Lord. They are accepting these obligations on themselves. And they're going from here forward, it's going to be different. And here's what's cool. These four things are commands from God that have a wisdom to them that we just don't normally see. Now, the thing in the Old Testament about not intermarrying with people from other nations, that was never about the race or ethnicity of the people. And we know that because Moses was the guy that wrote that law down, and his wife was not Jewish. She was not from Israel. She was, and so the issue was always the beliefs of the person you're marrying. You want to get as close as you can to a similar worldview to the person you're marrying as possible. And I think this, I personally think this goes beyond just Christian, are you Christian? Like, I think you should narrow it down as much as you can, right? Like, if you're Baptist, you probably don't want to marry, an Episcopal person. Like, you have it's a little bit of different things going on. Or if you're someone that speaks in tongues, you don't want to marry someone who's like, me, I don't know, but if you vote Republican, you probably don't want to marry Democrat, like that sort of stuff. Like, try and narrow it down, and there's a wisdom behind it, where you say, okay, I'm going to close off certain things because then those are fights you don't have to have later. Those aren't like frustrations you have to have later. And up until America, by the way, it's hard for us to understand this in America because we see religious diversity everywhere. Like there's a Christian church here, and then there's a Moravian church over there, and there's a Church of God over there, and there's a Methodist church over there, and then there's other religions, and we just kind of see it around. But before America, you could almost always guess what faith a person was based off of what nation they lived in. Right? The Scottish were all Presbyterian. The British were all Church of England. Spain were all Catholic, right? And in this time, all the people around Israel, you knew based off their nation what gods they worshipped. And what happens every time is when you marry a person who does not have the same faith as you, you end up with a tug of war. And the Israelites lost that tug of war almost every time. And so they go, okay, we're not going to keep making this mistake forever. We're going to do it God's way now. And then there's the Sabbath. Now, what's the wisdom of the Sabbath? The Sabbath is a day that is a mandatory time every week where you don't get to work. It's not telling you how much you have to work. It's telling you can't work this much. To where it says, listen, you have to rest. 101 of being a human is you have to rest. Did you know that? Did you know that you have to spend 8 hours every single day just laying there, oblivious to the world, not thinking about anything? Like that's best case scenario. That in a 24-hour period, 1/3 of that would be spent with you doing nothing because you need rest. And as science has advanced till today, I can't go to podcast interviews without hearing someone go, can I just tell you about this new thing I discovered called sleeping? It's like the most amazing thing ever. Like people are talking about sleep like it's a new invention. And 6,000 years ago, God's going, you've got to get your rest. You can't just go. It's going to kill you. I heard a guy talking about diet the other day. This kind of blew me away. He said this, listen, I don't care what you're eating. If you're not getting good sleep, that's the first thing you have to fix, which is fascinating. That God, so long ago, God's like, hey, you should really focus on this because you got to get some rest. You can't just kill yourself out there. And nowadays, people are going, we got to figure out rest because we're killing ourselves out there. We're killing ourselves. And what happens as we step into the ways of God, even the ones we don't necessarily understand, even the ones we don't like, the ones that are not enjoyable, they don't seem like they'd add a whole lot to us, that once we step into them, we then, as we live them out, we can come to understand them. And we realize that there was a deep wisdom hiding in plain sight. And that God's actually calling us to something good, and something better. And here's what I'm willing to bet. If you and I could pinpoint something in our lives that we're kind of being skittish about with God, and we're kind of going, God, I don't know if I want to jump in on this one. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't know. It's kind of bothering me or whatever. My theory, my bet is that if you were to jump in, sometime on the other side of that, sometime you'd look back and go, wow, there was some real wisdom there that I just didn't know about before I started going all in with God. And so that's where these people are. They're at the build-up. They're going, man, oh man, it's going to be different forever now, right? Everything's going to be different. It's looking like a fairy tale. And then time passes. All false peaks have the letdown. Nehemiah goes back to Persia to be the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes. That was always the deal, remember? The second question was, how long are you going to be gone? He's like, because I like my wine. And so he goes back. Israel's all good. They're set up. We've accomplished it. Everything's going to be great. And then one day he goes, hey, can I go back and visit? Can I just go see what is going on? I want to go see how things are going there. I put a lot of work in there. I want to see it. And he goes back, and in chapter 13, here's some of the things that we read. By the way, what you're going to see is that Nehemiah is going to come back, and at every point along the way, they have turned away from God. Every commitment they made, they broke. Eliashib, the priest, Here's verse 3, starting in verse 3. I chopped it up a little bit. Eliashib the priest, so he's in charge of the temple and stuff like that, prepared for Tobiah a large chamber where they had previously put grain offering. Okay, so this is stuff. All right, here's a room in the temple. The grain offerings go here. You give your grain offerings. It goes into this chamber over here. He prepared that chamber for Tobiah. And I was angry. Verse 8, I was angry. And I threw the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. And then I gave orders that they cleansed the chambers, and they brought back the vessels of the house of God and the grain offerings of the frankincense. What is going on there? The priests let Tobiah use the temple as an apartment. He's just living there. This is where people are bringing in their offerings. This is where it's supposed to go, and this guy's just living. He's got a couch. He's got household furniture in there. And he's going, what is happening right now? And then it says this in verse 28. And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, by the way, who is Tobiah? Does anybody remember who Tobiah is? He's the dude always hanging out with Sanballat. He's the one, the guys who are threatening them and trying to put fear in them so they don't build the wall. Remember that? He's actually the guy who came up with that wonderful line, if a fox jumped on the wall, it would break down. That's the guy that the priest is now going, well, he's kind of a friend of mine, so I'm going to let him live at the temple. And Nehemiah's going, what are you talking about? He's an enemy of God. He's an enemy of us. And you're just letting him live there. In 28, one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, the same guy that put up Tobiah, his son was the son-in-law of Sanballat. He just married Sanballat's daughter. Therefore, I chased him from me. That's what Nehemiah said. Just I'm going to kill you. What is going on here? And he says that, and what happens is, so they're not keeping the Sabbath. They're just buying. They're buying goods. People are allowed to set up a marketplace in the city square on the Sabbath, and all the people are just buying it with them. They're not giving to the temple. They're not keeping up the temple. It's just falling in disrepair. Some dude's apartment complex. And Nehemiah shows back up and he realizes, what has happened with you? Don't you realize that you're becoming friends with the enemies of our people, of our God? And this is what James 4 says this. It says, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. And what he's saying is, when you fall in love, become more concerned about making the people in this world happy, one person you will not be making happy is God. He will fall all the way off your radar. And so you better be careful. And so there it is. The end of Nehemiah. It's kind of brutal, huh? Actually, I missed the part where he started ripping people's hair out. It got bad. He was like, guys, I'm going to fight every last one of you right now. That's how mad he was. A book that had all the makings of a fairy tale. We're just going to go off in the sunset with God. It's going to be great. So it's going to be different from here until forever. And then it wasn't. And then they just completely went back to their old ways. And here's the deal. It was a false peak. It was a high point that had all the buildup, but then it had the letdown. Where Nehemiah realized, there's a lot more work that has to be done to get these people straight. There's a lot more work that has to be done. All false peaks have the buildup and the letdown. And I told you, the Old Testament is very familiar with this exact false peak. Just read the Old Testament. Name your favorite Old Testament hero, and you probably have a story in his life that you've just taken out of your mind because he fell miserably. Moses didn't get to go into the promised land because of pride. The people The people in the book of Judges were constantly getting conquered by their neighboring people because they would worship idols and they wouldn't worship their God. Your favorite judge has a pretty dark shadow part of his story that we just don't tell in kids' stories. King David let his family just dissolve in front of his face because he refused to deal with hard things that were going on. And every person who had the buildup had the letdown. And the Old Testament is familiar with it, but they're not comfortable with it. Because they didn't know how to fix it. And the prophets started coming around God started speaking through the prophets, and they started addressing this issue. What's wrong with these? Why are their voices, their mouths are close to me, but their hearts are far from me? Like, why is that a thing that's going on over and over and over again? And then some of the prophets started getting these little words about the problem is our heart. The problem is our heart. He's going, oh, you know what God needs to do? He doesn't need to write more laws on a tablet of stone so they can follow it, because they won't. What I need to do is I need to start writing my law on your heart. What I need to do is start shaping you in a way to where from the inside out your life becomes different. Here's what Ezekiel says. God says through the prophet Ezekiel, he says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from your uncleanliness. And from all your idols I will cleanse you. And I will give you a new heart. And a new spirit I will put in you. And I will remove your heart of stone, and I will give you a fleshy, good heart made of flesh. That's the message of the Old Testament. That if all there is you and me and a law, we will have false peak after false peak after false peak. And you and I, there's two basic ways that we interact with a false peak. Some of us go, okay, I know I'm discouraged, I know I fell, and I know I broke this over here, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life climbing that mountain. I will get to the top of that mountain. And the other half of us get to the false peak and go, why bother? What's the use? You know, when I think back at that time hiking to Callaway Peak, here's what I think about that rainstorm. If it were not for an act of God, I would have died on that mountain. My nickname would have gone from bookworm to worm food. You know what I mean? Like, they'd be like, you know what? They would have had to drag me off the mountain. I would have said, no, we're good. I can do it. I can keep going until I just died, you know? And they'd be like, Garrett's super annoying ever since he died, and we have to drag him off this mountain, you know? Like, that's what would have happened. If it were not for an act of God, I would have died up there. And here's the message of the Bible. If it's not for an act of God, you will die on that mountain. You will die trying to prove yourself, or you will die running away from God. You will not live up to His word, and you will not be good enough for His grace. But if it's not for an act of God, you will die on the mountain. And the message of the New Testament is that not that it taught us the right words to say so we could finally make it up to God, but that the Word became flesh and came down to us. And He died for our sins. He lived the life we could not live. And He died the death we could not die. And He rose from the dead, conquering your sin, conquering your opening the prison cells that is your slavery to sin. He says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. You know what's fascinating about that line? I think he just kind of walked around as a human being on earth, figuring out how guys live their lives, and goes, wow, you've been carrying that for how long? You've been dealing with that for this? Wait, how long has it been you've been dealing with that when I've been here the whole time? You've been carrying what load your whole life, never letting it go? How are you just going to keep living that way? And one day he goes, guys, I have news for you, because I know the whole world makes you think it's not true, but I've got news for you. The burden I put on you is light. And it is easy to carry. So come to me. So you don't have to climb that mountain looking for one false peak after the next false peak after the next false peak. Come to me, and I will give you life. No one comes to the Father but through me. That's what Jesus says. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And if you and I don't get to the point in our lives where we say, I'm going to do business with Jesus. I'm not going to decide to turn over a new leaf. No, I'm going to decide to give my life to Jesus Christ. And whatever struggles I have, they're His struggles too. And whatever burdens I carry, they're His burdens too. And whatever sins I commit from here on out, they're His thing to solve with me and to heal me of that. And if we don't ever get to the place where we say, I'm done with this old life, I'm coming to you, you will die on that mountain. However it is you're choosing to handle this life, you will die out there, and you'll die alone. But Jesus Christ came, and He died, that no one else would ever have to die. It's the message of the Bible. It's the message of the Bible. That you're not good enough, and you're going to die alone. Wow, that's quite a message. But the God of the universe came, so you didn't have to die by yourself. If you and I want to live, we got to come to Jesus. We got to give our lives to Christ. And this church exists to help you make that decision. To help you figure out what questions do I have to answer? What thought processes do I have to wrestle to the ground? What do I need to do that makes me say, you know what, it's time for me to get in this baptistry and give my life to Christ? We exist to help you with those questions and the life after. And my prayer is that we will be a church that does, that gives our life to God and says, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life climbing a mountain I don't have the ability to climb, but I'm going to come to Jesus because He is available to all of us.